Free will is a big question. Here's why. Free will defines what it is like to be human, sets standards for responsibility and judgment, explores hidden realms of consciousness. Yet free will is an utter mystery, because what seems to be self-evident, that for any decision we make, we could have made a different decision, seems to contradict the laws of physics. Can I have free will? I recall philosopher Galen Strawson's stark argument.
When we act, we do what we do because of the way we are. So, to be truly responsible for what we do when we act, we need to be truly responsible for how we are. Because you've already allowed that when we act, we do what we do because of the way we are. But we cannot be ultimately responsible for the way we are. Conclusion, so we can't be free. There's a fundamental sense in which free will is impossible. And it doesn't make any difference whether the world is determined or not. It's impossible either way. At the same time, I think we can't help believing we've got it. So it's perhaps the most dramatic, irresoluble clash in the whole of philosophy.
So if philosophy can't resolve this clash, what about science? Can science solve the problem of free will? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth asks the big questions of free will. If science can solve the problem of free will, there is only one place it would have to start. It is the seat of all thought and emotion, the center of free will, the most complex organization we know in the universe, the human brain. What does brain science say about free will? I asked philosopher Al Mele, leader of the Big Questions in Free Will project.
I'll start with an experiment that really got the ball rolling. It's by a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet. So the task subjects had was to flex a wrist whenever they felt like it, and then after they flexed, they would report where a spot was on a very fast clock when they first felt the urge, intention, wish, will, decision to flex. And they were hooked up to two machines. So they were getting EEG readings from the scalp, and they were getting muscle motion readings with an electromyograph. And what he discovered is that when subjects were regularly reminded not to plan in advance when to flex, you got an EEG ramp up that started at 550 milliseconds before the muscle burst. That's about half a second.
And that's a long time in brain terms, half a second.
Oh, it sure is. Now, the average time of first reported awareness of this mental event, the decision or intention or whatever, was 206 milliseconds before the muscle.
About a fifth of a second.
That's right. So there's a lag between the EEG ramp up and this reported time of first awareness.
Which seems to indicate that the brain, without our conscious knowledge, is already planning, and then I'm suddenly aware of it, as if my consciousness, my so-called free will, is sort of a froth.
Yeah.
It's just kind of riding along, but has no impact on really what's happening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So his thought is the brain is making these decisions about a third of a second before you become aware of them. So it's making them unconsciously. Free will has to be a conscious process, so free will's not involved. He actually thought that free will could step in after you.
So do the Libet experiments abolish free will? I ask Christof Koch, a neuroscientist at Caltech, whose team is doing an intracranial study of free will and moral responsibility. Christof wonders whether deliberation, choosing, makes a difference. Christof, your experiment as part of the Big Questions in Free Will project involves real-time work with patients who have electrodes implanted for medical reasons. What is the basic science, the basic neurobiology behind the experiment?
Our experiment, a basic variant of a famous experiment by Benjamin Libet. We're trying to understand the neuronal mechanism that underlie a voluntary decision that traditionally people would say involves free will. And we know from previous experiments there are several components to this. One component relates to this feeling that psychologists now call authorship or agency. I lift my right hand and I have a feeling that I, not you, not my parents, not my friends, were responsible for me lifting this hand. We know there's a specific locus in the brain that generates this conscious sensation. We like to separate that out from the neural mechanism that actually gives rise to what I personally feel is this voluntary action. What are the actual mechanisms? Where's the decision first taken and what parts of the brain are involved in what sequence? So finally, I lift my right hand. And more interesting from a practical perspective, can I predict this ahead of time? Can I maybe read off your brain signal so I can know 1 second ahead of time, are you going to move the right hand? Are you going to move the left hand? The other thing we're interested in is in looking at choices, at voluntary, deliberate choices. See, most of the things that we care about when we talk about free will is, am I going to choose college A or B? Am I going to date this person or that person? What we care about is choices that involve deliberations, because that also brings in moral judgment. Should I be doing this? Is this a wise idea? Am I going to hurt somebody, etc.? And so there we're devising a slightly different paradigm where we play a simple game where the patient is free to move one or the other hand. At some command, we lift both of our hands. However, if you lift the same hand as I do, then you win $1. Right. And if we do this, you see, then I win $1. And once again, this is much closer to the real decision that we care about because it has consequences and you deliberate rather than just, it doesn't matter, pick this or this, they're exactly identical. I can take out both, so I have to take one. And now the neural mechanism the same.
Christof sends me to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in West Los Angeles, where I'll get a ringside seat watching the brain make real-world decisions. A patient has graciously allowed me to observe as she undergoes brain surgery, and then as she takes tests of decision-making and free will. I meet neurosurgeon Dr. Adam Mele.
We do an operation, a craniotomy, where we open the skull, make a reasonably large opening, and put a sheet of electrodes on the surface of the brain. It covers the area that we think is involved, plus the periphery around it.
Dr. Mele takes me to meet his patient, Audrey Lazarga.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Every week of her life since she was a baby, Audrey has endured multiple epileptic seizures. Now she has a chance to be cured.
We'll be able to record your seizures, but we'll also be able to map the different areas of brain function.
Okay.
And we can also do other tests to really try to understand not specifically how your brain works, but how the brain works in general.
Okay.
And one of the questions that we're very interested in studying is, how do you make conscious decisions?
Of course, the most important thing is your health, which will be greatly improved by this, so we're really excited about that.
I'm excited about that too myself. Love you.
Love you too.
Can I have one for you, Mom? Can I have one from you?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
I
And
love
I'll
you,
be
Mother.
here, okay?
I know what's shaded.
My doctorate is in brain research. I have seen many brains. I am always in awe. It's a remarkable procedure. By charting Audrey's brain waves, neurosurgeons create a fine-grained map of her brain, enabling them to locate the lesion that radiates Audrey's seizures. At the same time, neuroscientists will examine brain activity during decision-making, seeking brain-based facts about consciousness and free will. Then, Dr. Mele will go back in and remove the lesion, extirpating disruptive brain tissue without harming healthy brain tissue. For Audrey, no more seizures. The seat of the self. I can hold it in my hand. Thoughts, emotions, personality, plans, hopes, dreams, the richness of inner experience. All of it right there. Dr. Mamelak gently places the sheet of electrodes on Audrey's exposed brain. As Dr. Mamelak sews Audrey up, I return to the locker room, entranced.
As many times as you see the human brain, especially just after seeing the real person, it's a spiritual experience. In a pea-sized part of that brain, maybe that big, there could be 100,000 different neurons and 10,000 different connections with each of those 100,000. So, you're dealing with hundreds of millions of bits of information flying around every second in that small area, and that's what constitutes everything that we think is human. So, it can be a spiritual experience.
Audrey will recover from the surgery and then be tested on free will. A week later, at Caltech, Uri Maoz shows me the results.
Basically, the patient and I are playing a simple version of the rock, scissors, paper that children play. If I raise the mirror image of what you raised, then let's say I win.
Okay.
And if we raise the same hand, so if you raise your right hand and I raise the right hand, then you win. We start with $5, and every time she wins, I give her 10 cents, so I lose 10 cents and she gains 10 cents. And if she loses, it's the other way around. And if she doesn't react quickly enough, because the idea, of course, you can always just wait to see what the other guy's doing and move, we just deduct 10 cents. So it becomes competitive. We play for about 50 rounds.
How does the protocol work where you are able to beat the patient?
So we are used to thinking about, I'm reaching for this glass and it's just happening as I think about it. But of course, it's not like that. There's a lot of preparation going on before I move. This preparatory activity happens in the brain, and we can pick up on it. And what we're interested in is finding the difference between preparatory activity towards moving the left hand versus moving the right hand, to be able to predict which hand you will raise before the go signal telling you to raise your hand is even there.
What are you recording from?
We record from inside the brain. So we have this grid here, which is much closer to the source of the signal than you would have if it was EEG and it's sitting here and there's the tissue and the skull and everything, the attenuation of the signal, and you don't know where it's coming from. So here we're much closer to the signal. So this grid is in her head here, and from this grid we see these wires coming out. From here it goes into these panels here, and from there's a wire that goes to a system that records and does some analysis, and from that system through another wire that you kind of maybe see here goes into this machine. I get a beep either on the right ear or on the left ear, which tells me to raise my right hand or my left hand in order to beat the patient. And this is half a second before the go signal. So I know what I need to move, and I just wait half a second for the go signal and move it.
Okay, let's see what really happened.
Okay. This is counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then go, 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 and we raise our hand. So if I win, my side of the response box lights up in blue, and if she wins, her side of the response box lights in red. You can see here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then go. So this time she won and I lose. This is, okay, she didn't raise her hand quickly enough here. And then again, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And this time I win. And then again, so I win this time. And then we try it again. And so this goes on like that for about 50 trials. There's a screen behind Audrey. She can't see it, and the screen shows an arrow which hand she's going to raise according to the real-time system. So she's about to raise her right hand, and it was okay.
It's just the arrow comes on like just a fraction of a second before she moves.
Right, before the go signal.
Right.
So this time it was correct. She did raise the hand that the arrow was pointing at, and again it was correct. She raised the hand the arrow was pointing at. Yeah, correct again. So we were able to beat her, and we played 3 times. I was able to win with a relatively large margin 2 of those 3 times. It was a lot of fun playing with her. She was just very nice. She was competitive about it. It had meaning.
Yeah, that's good.
That was the important thing for us.
That's very good.
Well, it's going to there. Sorry.
Okay, so what are the implications for free will here?
Well, if I can predict what you're doing when your decision is making a difference, and I can still do it before you make your decision, it might be stronger evidence that these unconscious processes are affecting also these types of decisions that are more important for moral responsibility.
Well, the implications of what you're saying, though, is that if you are able to predict this to the degree of accuracy that you can, our brain is making our decisions and we're not. It does give us some philosophical pause about what free will is.
If the feeling of agency occurs after the brain has already set actions in motions, then, like it or not, free will, at least in the ordinary sense, is an illusion. The experiment exemplifies Christof's approach to consciousness. Get hard scientific data from the brain. Nothing less will do.
Okay, so this is where I think some really interesting neuroscience comes in. So it turns out the feeling of free will, it's called also authorship. So I freely will raise my hand. It's not that I suddenly say, hey, my hand just lifted, that's funny. No, it was me. Christof Koch that decided to lift it. There's a specific neural circuit in the head that gives rise to this feeling of authorship or agency. These are different names. It's a conscious feeling like any other feeling, like a feeling of pain or pleasure. Right, over here there's some neurons, when they fire, I see red. Over here neurons that fire, I get a toothache. And over there are neurons that fire, and I have this feeling of authorship. And we know this partly because surgical experiment where the neurosurgeon had to go in and stimulate part of the brain as part of a brain operation. And then people get these feelings. They say, oh, I wanted to twist my tongue without actually twisting their tongue. Or I get this urge to move my hand without actually moving their hand. And so it turns out that the brain generates these feelings. They are as real as all the other feelings that we have, that I'm the author.
If our feeling of authorship is just a froth that arrives after our brain has made the actual decision, then how can we possibly have free will?
The problem of free will is who or what made me raise my right hand? Was it completely determined by the physics of the brain? It's just a natural consequence of the brain state, and we're just fated to act out things that were determined all the way by the prime cause way back at the beginning of the universe.
And everything was set by the initial conditions of the universe plus the laws of physics.
Exactly. There's no additional wiggle room left for me. We've hit sort of the bedrock of determinism. This fills me with abhorrence. The idea that the fact that we're sitting here today at this table having this discussion was already inherent in the initial, in the Big Bang, 13 billion years ago, that fills me with...
And every word you're saying, every idea
was
that you
predetermined.
have.
I find this very horrible, just personally. However, we find ourselves in a universe where quantum mechanics rules, and we know that quantum mechanics is a fundamental indeterministic theory, and that all we can give probabilities. And so we know that we don't live in that deterministic universe. That means nobody and nothing could have predicted our discussion today.
But that's sort of a randomness, and that doesn't put me, whatever the me is, in control. I don't have free will if I randomly do this.
That's correct.
And you're happy with that step?
No, but I'm much more happy with that step, yes, than living in a universe where everything is predetermined.
Okay, but you still don't have free will under this.
If you just believe in standard physics, I don't think you can uphold a conventional libertarian view of free will, because I don't see where the additional traction is supposed to come from.
Okay.
I don't think that's true. You can feel free, like I feel free. I know I'm not fully predetermined from the initial conditions because all these other things intervene, but it's not this free will that I grew up with. But then after a while, you become an adult.
Christof struggles with what the science says and what the self feels. I struggle myself. But some believe that science does not get final say. To Christian philosopher Richard Swinburne, the idea that science can separate our intents from our actions is misguided.
Much of the time, our intentions are caused fairly automatically by our desires and our beliefs. But when we have a serious moral problem, when we are having to decide, shall I tell the truth when I don't want to tell the truth, here we realize it's up to us. And it's a basic epistemological principle that we should believe that things are the way they seem to be in the absence of counter-evidence. So we should believe it really is up to us unless you've got any reason to suppose it isn't. Now, what would the reason to suppose it isn't consist in? Well, it would consist in having a deterministic mind-brain theory, saying that these brain events cause these intentions. Now, I don't think you can have such a theory, because the only reason you can have a successful deterministic or semi-deterministic theory of the physical world is because you can establish general laws by repeating experiments. But once you come to the mental life, you come to things which can't be measured. Because there's only one person who has privileged access to them. You can't measure whether a pain is twice as painful as another pain. And yet what somebody does depends on whether the pain is twice as painful as another pain. The beliefs and intentions we have, all of these concepts have no numerical relation to each other. So the only kinds of laws you could establish for the mind-brain interaction would concern what a particular person with a particular sort of mental life does in a particular situation. But you won't have more than one instance of this situation, and it won't be a kind of situation which is repeated, and therefore you can't have the evidence that this is a deterministic system. And therefore you should believe that things are as they initially seem to be. That is to say, that your intentions are affecting your actions. My argument is the counter-evidence couldn't ever be produced.
As a theist, Richard rejects the whole brain-mind identity system. And because aspects of mental life cannot be measured, he says, free will cannot be determined. As an atheist, philosopher Colin McGinn agrees that free will is not determined. But why, he offers, is a mystery.
Notoriously, if all human actions, that means human choices, are fixed by deterministic causation and laws, then they couldn't have been otherwise. And so they're determined to be as they are. And the causation there is just ordinary physical causation, which seems incompatible with freedom of the will. I think what we need to do is recognize, to begin with, that we need to assume that there's another kind of causation, or how things happen, mental causation. And we can say what the causal relations are. We can say, for example, that my beliefs and desires enter causally into a relation with my actions and my decisions. So you need the idea of mental causation. Now, somebody may say to me at that point, but what is this idea of mental causation? How do you explain it? My point there is that you can't explain it in terms of ordinary physical causation. It's a sui generis type of causation. It's a different kind of thing. If you say to me, well, all right, tell me what it is, my answer is this: I don't know what it is. I think it's mysterious what it is. So there is a kind of causation, but we don't have any good theory of what that causation is. So we can't really have a science of why people...
Mental causation sounds rather desperate, far out. Well, that's the point. Only a desperate, far-out theory, Colin believes, can create a will that's truly free. Data from the brain, by itself, does not favor free will. Our sense of agency is nothing special, and predicting decisions from brain electricity seems a death certificate for free will. So, who's the boss? Me or my brain? The stakes are the highest. Probing human essence, judging moral responsibility, clarifying consciousness, and perhaps a window to the divine. The Big Questions in Free Will project is pioneering and visionary, and Closer to Truth is following it. The strategies, challenges, research, results, arguments, counter-arguments, new thinking. Personally, I maintain a steely standard of skepticism, but I wear a tenuous smile of hope. Can free will get any closer to truth?
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com. This program was supported in part by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation.